The ayes are 61, the noes are 57. The motion is agreed to.
Telecommunications, Interception Capability and Security Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.
New Zealand International Convention Centre Bill, second reading.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I move that the New Zealand International Convention Centre Bill be now read a second time. I'd like to thank the members of the Commerce Committee for their work in considering this bill, the work by officials and those who submitted on the bill. And this, Mr Speaker, is a bill that will provide jobs and growth for New Zealanders. And once again, the government lines up in this House in support of jobs and growth, and the opposition lines up against jobs and growth. Although actually, because it's a personal vote, Labor members opposite today have a chance to demonstrate if they're actually in favour of jobs for Kiwis or if they only cry crocodile tears, washed away, of course, occasionally in some cases by the hospitality of certain Sky City.
Oh, that's right.
Mr Speaker, I also think they have some wriggle room, the Labor Party, because I think they were in favour of it in 2011 before they were against it under the previous leader. And then the current leader was going around Auckland saying he was sort of in favour of it but not publicly, and then I think he went out on the weekend and said that he would not rip up the contract and we will not throw out the term of Sky City's gaming licence. So I think that does give members opposite a certain amount of latitude, at least 7 or 8 positions that they could adopt in voting for this bill. Mr Speaker, the construction of the New Zealand International Convention Centre is vital for this country. There will be 1,000 people employed in the construction process. There will be 800 people servicing the needs of delegates and exhibitors when the centre is fully established. These are real jobs that provide real incomes for New Zealanders and support their families, Mr Speaker. This bill will help generate economic growth for all New Zealanders. The Convention Centre will inject an estimated $90 million in initial spending by delegates in Auckland and elsewhere in this country. There is expected to be a $49 million jump in GDP as a result. Mr Speaker, this bill will enhance New Zealand's international reputation. It will enable the construction of an international standard convention centre seating up to 3,500 delegates, something we've never had in New Zealand before and something that has been repeatedly called for over the last 20 years. It will be a new $400 million asset that will consolidate Auckland's standing as an international metropolitan city and a destination of significance. And all of these things, Mr Speaker, will be achieved with very little, if any, direct investment by New Zealand taxpayers. And that's the beauty of this legislation and agreement, Mr Speaker. Some of the claims made about this agreement and this bill over the last few months have been ridiculous. Let me just address a few of them. First, there is the claim that the deal is unfair to the Crown. The agreement between Sky City and the Crown was described by the independent assessment of Kora Mentha as a fair deal for both parties. And market analysts and investors have clearly agreed with that as assessment, as Sky City's share price has not given a significant boost when the agreement was announced. And then there was the criticism of the compensation provisions in the agreement. I fear Mr Mallard obviously wants to besmirch independence, that's fine. Then there was the criticism of the compensation provisions in the agreement. Let's be clear, the provisions in the agreement reflect standard commercial practice, which is that if either party, not just the Crown, breach the agreement, then the regime will operate to restore the parties as they would have been in but for the breach of that agreement. If Sky breaches certain agreed operating standards, they will be required to pay the Crown money for non-compliance. If Sky City does not deliver on its end of the agreement, it is required to pay back to the Crown the value of the regulatory concessions granted to that point. There has also been, Mr Speaker, some excitable commentary that the agreement breaches the principle of equality before the law, except that many pieces of legislation confer benefits on a particular party or activity. Look, for example, at the Rugby World Cup empowering legislation, or the legislation that established Fonterra. And nor is there anything special in the fact the legislation gives effect to an agreement. Parliament has considered treaty settlement bills for nearly 20 years now, which does exactly as this bill does, give effect to an agreement. Some have even claimed the agreement breaches parliamentary sovereignty or the Bill of Rights of 1688, Mr Speaker. Yet government contracts pass the expiry of Parliament all the time. Indeed, government could not function if contracts did not extend past the ending of particular governments. It enters into long-term agreements on construction projects like roads and rail, and a whole range of government services like IT and banking. Mr. Speaker, I do want to spend a bit of time on one area of criticism, which is about problem gambling, and that is where some of the more ill-informed criticism has been directed. The first point to make is that there is no certainty at all that this bill would increase the prevalence and harm created by problem gambling. The impact on the incidence of problem gambling from increasing gambling opportunities within an existing gambling venue is by no means clear, as Professor Max Abbott at Auckland University of Technology stated in his oral submission to the committee, although probably he's part of the conspiracy as well. The Department of Internal Affairs acknowledges that figures around problem gambling are very difficult to quantify, and putting a cost on it is extremely difficult. Secondly, it's very important to note that the agreement requires Sky City to implement a range of enhanced harm minimisation measures before any of the new pokies or other concessions are able to be used. They include a predictive modelling tool that analyses data to better identify players at risk of problem gambling. The Greens claimed in their minority report that Sky already uses this. This is false. Thanks to this agreement, Sky City will be one of only 2 places in the world where this software is used. A voluntary pre-commitment system where players can elect to restrict the amount of time they play or the amount they spend. A doubling in the number of host responsibility specialists to deliver 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coverage. The introduction of player identification requirements when amounts of over $500 are being put onto or cashed from Tito tickets in non-restricted areas. Some submitters felt that the harm minimisation provisions are an important aspect of the agreement and they should receive specific statutory recognition. The Commerce Committee agreed, and this recognition is now provided in the purpose and outline section of the bill, and I support that amendment. Third, these extra harm minimisation requirements will become part of Sky City's host responsibility program, which is monitored constantly by experienced and professional internal affairs inspectors. The Gambling Commission is also required to review this every 2 years, and it involves independent experts in those reviews. This method of review is entirely up to the Commission, which acts independently. In August of this year, the Gambling Commission published its review of Sky City's Auckland casino program. Its assessment included extensive consultation with the Salvation Army, the Ministry of Health, the Department of Internal Affairs and Lifeline Aotearoa. The report concluded that New Zealand's regulatory environment is rigorous in the extent in which it emphasises responsible gambling principles, and that the casino's current host responsibility program is of a high standard internationally. Fourth, it is worth noting that in the future, if the Gambling Commission decides to revoke or amend Sky City's host responsibility program, or to require the Auckland Casino to have more or tougher harm minimisation measures, then Sky City must comply, and none of the other obligations in the agreement, including the compensation obligations, will apply in that situation. Fifth and finally, overall the number of pokie machines in New Zealand is falling by around 500 a year. This agreement would slow that reduction by around 6 months. Under the previous government, pokie machines actually increased by an average of 700 per year, and they claim to be concerned about them. Mr. Speaker, many things in life have risks attached to them. If you didn't want any risk, you would never get out of bed. The government has done a good job of minimising the harm from this agreement while maximising the economic benefits to New Zealand. In closing, let me summarise what this bill means for New Zealand. For little, if any, investment by taxpayers, New Zealanders will reap the benefits of a $400 million international standard convention centre. The 230 new pokie machines is the same number granted to Sky City under the previous government in 2001 for the development of the existing and much smaller Auckland Convention Centre. Helen Clark was happy to champion that at the time, and there wasn't a single squeak out of the Greens. There was no cardboard out on the forecourt of Parliament. There was nothing. They were quiet. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill about jobs and growth. Parties in favour of those things will vote in favour today. Parties who cry crocodile tears but don't actually support anything to create jobs and growth will once again vote against. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Ruth Dyer.